Today on Dylan Talks Tone, we are going to talk about Stratocasters and which one you should buy. We're going to split this up into a couple of videos because there is a bunch of them. Today we're going to talk about which American Stratocaster should you buy. Have you even looked on Fender's website lately? Have you been confused by how many different guitars there are to buy? There's like bajillions of models. And so what we're going to do is we're going to break this down. We're going to kind of do it the way we did our What Squire Telly Should You Buy last year. And I'm going to do this for this Strats and for the Tellys, but we're going to split it up a little bit. It's going to take a couple weeks to get through because we're going to do the American guitars. Then in our next video, we're going to do the Made in Mexico guitars because that's a whole nother thing. And there are these little subtle differences between each of these guitars, and it makes it difficult to kind of figure out which one should you buy. So we'll break that all down. And then if you think this is cool and you want me to do the Telly one, let me know, put it in the comments, and we'll do the same sort of thing. First American, and then the Made in Mexico stuff. So let's dive into all of the differences between these guitars and help you decide which one you should click on. I've been waiting for the neighbor to leave all morning because he's been out here messing with sewer hoses and stuff. So as soon as he pulls out, we'll be able to get going. Okay, so many minutes later. Okay, so the guitars we're going to talk about today, we're not going to get into all of the like endorsement guitars and all of the special edition stuff. We're just going to get into the normal American stuff. Back in the old days, they just called it the American Standard, and then they had some other stuff. Now it's a little bit more confusing and convoluted. So we're going to talk about the American Ultra Lux, the American Ultra, the American Original, the American Performer, and the American Professional 2. What is the difference between all of these guitars? Okay, so let's do this. Let's first of all talk about the American Original. That's the most expensive guitar in the range. It's right at $2,000, but I think it's really the most... Well, they call it the original because it is, to me, what an American Standard Strat should be. It's alder body, nitro finish on the body and on the neck. Okay, so that's key because we'll get into some differences of some other stuff in a little bit. Now, there's two versions of this guitar. There's a 50s and a 60s. What are the differences between these two guitars? Because pretty much everything on these guitars is the same. Besides colors and stuff, the 50s one is going to have a soft V neck profile, and the 60s one is going to have a thick C profile on the neck. What does this mean? So your normal slim C taper is what you see on a lot of guitars. Now the thick C is going to still be that C shape, but it's going to be thicker. It's actually going to have some heft to it. Now the V shape, that soft V, that's an acquired taste. Why would you want a V shape? Are you a thumb over the top of the neck guy? Then you might like a V shape. That's kind of what I would say there. As far as neck radiuses, both of these guitars have 9.5-inch fretboard radiuses. For those that are not familiar, what is fretboard radius? So radius is half of a circle. So if you were to take half of a circle and place the neck in it, basically the radius, the higher the number, the flatter the neck. The lower the number, the more arch in the neck there is. So the radius is the curve of the front of the fretboard. Okay? So a smaller number is going to be more rounded on the front of the fretboard, more vintage feeling. And as you go 9.5 and above, you're getting more into more modern stuff. But 9.5 is a nice middle ground. I really like 9.5. Personally, I'm a 12-inch guy, but the 9.5 makes a lot of sense for this guitar, and it puts it right in the middle. and it will make it easier to set the guitar up, etc. Other than that, these two guitars are basically all the same stuff. Vintage tall frets, and we'll get into the differences between frets here in a little bit. Vintage tall frets, it kind of looks like this in comparison to the other ones. These necks are going to feel pretty hefty in your hands if you have small hands. Just FYI on the Fender American Original. Other than that, these guitars are your just straight up vintage-ish style Fender Stratocaster guitars. And if you want the most vintagey kind of feeling without going custom shop prices, this is going to be your guitar. Okay, and trying to figure out how to keep all of this straight, that's the most difficult part. So bear with me here, and we're going to get through all this stuff. First of all, we're going to talk about the most expensive of the guitars that are left down to the cheapest. We're going to go first of all to the American Ultra Lux, the American Ultra, then we're going to go to the American Professional 2, and then we're going to go to the American Performer. We're going to take the American Ultra Lux and the American Ultra together because they're very similar, but the American Ultra Lux has a little bit more fanciness. One thing to think about here is all of these guitars are alder bodies and maple necks, except for the Ultra Lux. The Ultra Lux is ash body, okay? And it has a maple fretboard and not a rosewood fretboard. So this American Ultra Lux is kind of a little bit off by itself. It's got stainless steel frets. It's got a compound radius fretboard. So we just spoke about radiuses on fretboards. We talked about how curved the front of the fretboard is. Now on a compound radius, what you have is you have down here in the cowboy chords, like, you know, the first few frets, it's more radius, so it's more curved. It makes it nice and easy to be able to fret chords. Well, when you get down up here to the money-making end of the fretboard where the wheedly-deedlies are, then you have a flatter fretboard. It makes it easier to play faster. So believe it or not, a compound radius fretboard, for those of you that are not familiar, is actually kind of in the shape of a cone. So it's more curved down here and it's flatter up here. It's an interesting way to do it. Now the other thing about the Lux version of this guitar is that it has a tusk nut instead of bone, which I really like, and it also has stainless steel frets. And it also has a painted to match peg head as well. Kind of a little fancy. The cool part is it also has a D-shaped neck. So it's going to fill your hand up pretty well. It's, you know, it's going to be pretty hefty. Not to mention it's also going to have those medium jumbo frets. So, you know, it's going to have a pretty hefty feel in the hand. But it's going to play pretty nice. That compound radius fretboard is going to be cool. You're just going to have to make sure that you've got a buddy of yours that knows how to set up a compound radius fretboard, because they're a little different to set up. Now the American Ultra is basically the same guitar as the American Ultra Lux minus a couple of options, okay? So instead of having a painted peg head, it just has a glossy front peg head, okay? It has pretty much everything else the same. It's got the compound radius fretboard. It's got the same size frets, but they're not stainless. Okay, so it doesn't have a stainless fretboard or stainless frets. It's got the same noiseless pickups in it. The other thing it does not have, I forgot to mention, the Ultra Lux, the fancy one, has an S1 switch so that you can have basically seven pickup positions on your guitar. The regular American Ultra does not have that. What is interesting about these two guitars as well, along with their modern appointments, is they have the 2-point tremolo instead of 6 screws like the American Original that we spoke about previously. So the 6-screw tremolo is more vintage style and the 2-point tremolo is more modern, but they both work very well. So these two guitars are very, very cool. That Lux is a little more spendy, but you can understand why. Stainless frets is a big thing. That's a big one right there. So let's go ahead and talk about the American Professional 2 and the American Performer. So your American Performer and your American Professional 2 are pretty much just run-of-the-mill Strats, but there's a couple of main differences that might tip the scales for you when it comes for shopping for these guitars. They're both alder body, they're both urethane finishes, they're both satin finished necks. However, the American Performer has the 6-screw vintage style tremolo, and the American Professional 2 has that more modern the 2-point tremolo. So you've got the 6-screw and the 2-point tremolo. So there's a difference for you. The other thing is that the neck profile is just a little bit different. American Performer is going to have a modern C. That's my favorite. It's a little bit smaller, and then the other one is going to have a deep C. The Professional 2 is going to have a deep C. So what that means is it's still the same C-shaped profile, but it's just a little bit thicker. On top of the thicker neck, the American Professional 2 is going to have narrow, tall frets. So it's going to have a little bit taller, skinnier frets, where the other guitar, the Performer, is going to have jumbo frets. My personal feeling is I really like jumbo frets on a slim C fretboard. I think that's super killer. I really like the 6-screw tremolo as well. So I think, for me personally, this would be the choice. What's really interesting is this is the cheapest of all of the American guitars. And to me, this is where it's at if I wasn't going to buy the American original, that $2,000 one. Then the other thing about the American Performer guitar, the cheapest one, is that it also has a push-pull on one of the knobs that allows you to be able to add in that neck pickup in parallel, so that you can still have kind of like that David Gilmour 7-position sort of deal, sort of like that other guitar had. It's pretty cool. Different way of doing it though. No S1 switch, just regular push and pull. Okay, now that this is all clear as mud, let's break this down and talk about how you would choose which guitar to have. If you want as true to a properly vintage Stratocaster without going custom shop prices, the original is probably the one for you. Among the originals, if you want to do that thumb over the top of the neck, Eric Clapton kind of feel, then that V-shaped profile of the 50s is going to be the one for you. If you want just a pretty much regular vintage style Strat, then the 60s one is probably going to be more your jam. Of those two guitars, the 60s would be my favorite because I like the fret size that's on it and I like the shape of the neck that is on it. Now we get down into these other Strats. How are we going to choose between the Performer, the Professional 2, the Ultra, and the Ultra Lux? It's really going to come down to a couple of things. One is, what tone do you want? Because the American Ultra and the American Ultra Lux come with those vintage noiseless pickups. So if you want regular Alnico 5, not noiseless pickups, you have to buy either the Performer or the Professional 2. If you want super fancy with stainless and other modern appointments, then you have to stick with that Ultra Lux or the Ultra for your, compound radius fretboard and the 2-point tremolo. The Ultra and the Ultra Lux are just more modern takes on the Stratocaster. They really are. They got that different switching. They got some cool stuff there, which is pretty cool. Now the American Professional is going to have your 2-point trem, and the American Performer is going to have your 6-point trem. That's really the main difference. And of course the tone's going to be different because the Alnico pickups that are in those two other guitars is also a little bit different tone too. So you might want to hear those for yourself and decide if that's something that you want to do. I hope this helps. It's so confusing to try to keep all of this stuff straight. My gut feeling is that if you want a properly good, just regular Stratocaster with nothing fiddly about it, you go American Original, and among the American Originals, you just choose for your hand size based on what neck profile you have. If you're going to just buy a Strat, that $11.99 American Performer is probably the jam. It's really, really a good guitar. It's gonna do everything you want it to do. That is a Stratocaster for $11.99, which is interesting because I think I paid $1,100 for my Roadhouse Mexican. So in our next video, we'll break down all the Mexican stuff. I hope this helps. I know it was a little bit convoluted and weird, but you got to figure this stuff out. because it is very, very confusing. Thanks for hanging out. Make sure you check out our live video on Thursday, and you check out our other video on Friday. We do this every week. We've been doing it for a long time. If there's one of these that you want to see about a guitar series, we don't have to do it just about Fender stuff. We could do Gibson, whatever you want to do. I was thinking we'd do it again. Let me know and put it in the comments. Thanks for hanging out. Make sure you check out our Patreon. Make sure you hit the little join button down there to get access to all this stuff early and some other special stuff that we've got going, as well as a guitar building workshop that we're doing starting the 4th Sunday of this month on Patreon. So make sure you check that out as well, and hit the subscribe and little bell. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you soon.